The legacy of Chinggis Khan has had a great influence on Asia for centuries, inspiring small clans to achieve great conquests. But no one claimed the mantle of the great Khan more than Timur, also known as Tamerlane. So friends, in today's video I am starting a series about the life of the legendary Tamerlane, a man who was devoted to restoring the Mongol Empire. But in the end, he washed away its remnants in a sea of blood. Let me remind you, you're on the Amazing History channel, where we cover only the most fascinating events from ancient and medieval history. You can support the development of the channel as always on Patreon or PayPal. Don't forget to like and leave your opinion in the comments as well. Well, now let's get to the topic of this episode. Timur was born in April 1336 in Maverannahr, in the village of Khaja Ilgar, near the city of Kesh, into the family of a nobleman named Taragai. There is a legend that he was born with clenched fists full of blood. His father came from the Barlas tribe, which was considered Mongolian, but in fact had long been Turkicized and had adopted Islam. All that is known about Taragai's life is that he was a devout Muslim. He died in 1360 as his son was just beginning his rise to power. The sources say nothing about Timur's mother's origins. The official history also tells us nothing about the events of Timur's own life up until 1360. However, according to the accounts of the Arab historian Ibn Arab Shah, Timur began his career as the leader of a band of brave men who raided neighboring lands. According to the Persian historian Sharaf ad-Din Yazdi, Timur was engaged almost exclusively in war and hunting from the age of 10. He loved horses from a young age, he was a good rider, and he was an excellent archer. Timur's leadership qualities also appeared very early. Gradually, a group of nukers gathered around him with whom Timur spent all his time. In 1356, he entered the service of the ruler of Maverannahr, Emir Kazagan, who married him to his granddaughter Uljay Turkan Aga and the sister of his future companion, Hussein. A couple of years later, Emir dies, after which Maverannahr plunged into a whirlpool of turmoil for many years. Civil strife. The country split into several principalities. Taking advantage of this, in 1361, Khan Tughlaq Timur of Mogulistan from the Chagatai dynasty invaded here. During this attack, many of the emirs of Maverannahr fled. Timur took advantage of the opportunity and joined the Khan, who gave him control of the Kashkadaria vilayet. Soon the Khan returned to Mogulistan, leaving his son Ilyas Khoja Khan as the ruler of Samarkand. Timur, who was only 25 years old at the time, was appointed commander of his troops. Thus began Timur's rise to power. However, Timur did not serve the Chagataids for long. In 1362, he left. He himself explained his actions by saying that he had been slandered before the Khan, who gave a secret order for his execution. Upon learning about this, Timur pretended he was going hunting and escaped. His most turbulent period began. Together with his wife Uljay, her brother Hussein, and several influential warriors, they wandered through the lands of Khwarezm and the territories of the Turkmen tribes. Dangers awaited them at every step. Once, Timur even spent a couple of months in captivity with a Turkmen chieftain. He managed to escape only because he was able to win over a few of the jailers to his side. Gradually, Timur and Hussein's situation began to improve. The rule of the Mughals was harsh, and many who were dissatisfied with their power began to join the fugitive emirs. Soon, the number of their detachment grew to 3,000 people. With these warriors, they went to Khorasan and then to Sistan, and for some time served the local Maliks there. In one of the battles, Timur was wounded in his arm and right leg, after which he became crippled in his hand and lame. From that time, he received his nickname Timur Lenk, Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane. In 1364, the forces of Timur and Hussein grew significantly, so they decided to march against Ilyas Khajahan. In the battle on the banks of the Amu Darya, they defeated the Khan's army, crossed the river, and invaded Maverannahr. The population welcomed them as liberators near Samarkand. Timur and Hussein dealt another defeat to Ilyas, after which they took control of the entire country. A Kuram, a meeting of local nobility representatives, was held in Samarkand. Chingizid Kabul Shah was elected as the Khan of Maverannahr. However, he did not have any real power. Hussein once again made himself the ruler of Balkh and began to rule the lands on the left bank of the Amu Darya, while Timur received the lands on the right bank. However, the struggle with the Mughals was still far from over. In May 1365, a new battle took place near Tashkent against the troops of Ilyas Khaja Khan, known in history as the Muddy Battle. At the moment of the battle, a heavy downpour began, creating sticky, slippery mud. The horses got stuck in the mud, lost their footing, and fell. The Mughals, wrapped in long cloaks, managed to protect their bows from the harmful effects of moisture and were able to turn the tide of the battle. Timur and Hussein fled with the remnants of their troops to Karsi. Everything that had been achieved last year was lost. Historians explain the defeat by the indecisiveness of Hussein, who refused to support Tamerlane's offensive. However, Ilyas could not benefit from this victory. When he tried to seize Samarkand, he encountered brave resistance from the townspeople, led by local independent rebels, the Sarbadars. They armed the townspeople and built barricades. The Moghulistan horsemen lost 2,000 men and retreated when they tried to enter Samarkand. Soon, a severe outbreak among the horses began in the Mughal camp. After a successful start, in 1366, Timur and Hussein approached Samarkand, lured the leaders of the Sarbadars into their camp by deception, and executed them. Their control over the region was restored. However, after defeating their external enemies, the contradictions between Timur and Hussein sharply intensified. Each of the emirs dreamed of sole power. Timur himself believed that the early death of Uljay ended their friendship. With the death of my wife, my kinship with Emir Hussein also ended. There was nothing left between us but enmity and hatred, he recalled. In 1367, Hussein attacked Akarshi and Timur retreated beyond the Amu Darya. At one time, he had only 200 men left under his command. With these forces, he managed to capture the fortress of Naksha in a surprise attack whose garrison consisted of 1,200 men. Then, with bold raids, he scattered the detachments of Hussein that were pursuing him. Warriors began to gather under Timur's banner, and soon he was once again commanding impressive forces. Most likely, this forced Hussein to seek peace. The emirs made peace, and in 1369 launched a joint campaign into the lands of modern Afghanistan and captured Kabul. At the same time, Timur undertook an independent conquest of Badakhshan while he was in the eastern part of the country. In February 1370, a Kurultai was held by the Khan, where the Chinggisid Abul Sultan was proclaimed and Hussein was declared the ruler of Maverannahr. This new attempt to seize power served as the reason for the final break in relations between Timur and Hussein. In March, Timur unexpectedly approached Balkh. Hussein was taken by surprise and surrendered, but despite the promise to spare his life, Hussein was immediately executed. In April, a new Kurultai was held in Balkh Khan, where the Chinggisid Soyurgatmish was elected, and Timur was appointed as the ruler of Maverannahr. Here, it's probably worth explaining. Following the established tradition that only direct descendants of Chinggis Khan could be Khans, Timur did not take the title of Khan. Marriage to the daughter of Chinggisid Kazan Khan, the captive widow of Emir Hussein, Saraymul Khanum, allowed Timur to add the honorary title of Gur Khan to his name, meaning son-in-law of the Khan. Suyurgatmish was only a formal and decorative ruler. He did not possess any real power. In general, from 1370, the era of Timur's sole rule began. His power was practically unlimited. Moreover, his appearance and character perfectly matched the role he took upon himself as the autocratic ruler of many peoples. Timur was tall, possessed great strength, and was very brave. By nature, he was stern and harsh. He did not like jokes and could not tolerate lies. In his habits, he was always simple and preferred hunting and playing chess to any other pleasure. At the same time, Timur was a great connoisseur and admirer of poetry. He had a good command of Turkic and Tajik languages. However, according to some accounts, he could neither read nor write. Despite this, he was quite educated, as he had special readers with him who would constantly read books to him during his leisure time. Timur loved history and had considerable knowledge in this subject. He respected scholars, valued astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. Above all, he was most passionate about architecture. During his reign in Maverannahr, grand construction projects were launched. Good roads were built, bridges were constructed, canals were laid, and new villages, mosques, caravanserais, baths, and madrasas were established. By the summer of 1370, new fortifications had already been built around Samarkand, which Timur had chosen as his capital. A three-story palace was built in the center of the city. During those years, Samarkand was completely rebuilt. Several new districts sprang up here. Well-equipped bazaars and beautiful buildings appeared. Parks are being established in the outskirts of the capital, open to all the city's residents. For his native Timur Maverannahr, the years of his rule were a period of prosperity and well-being. The rivers of blood spilled by Tamerlane during his numerous wars, the cruelty towards the subjugated peoples, the ruthless plundering, and the towers of skulls turned into a stream of material wealth for the people of Maverannahr, and especially Samarkand. Treasures were brought here, and craftsmen from all over the east were exiled to this place. During his early rule in Maverannahr, Tamerlane started conquering nearby regions. First of all, he subdued the rebellious Shibaghan. Then war broke out with Khwarezm. His troops besieged Urgench, where Khwarezm Shah Kosayin Sufi was hiding. In early January 1372, Khwarezm Shah died, after which Urgench opened its gates to Timur. A year later, Timur launched a second campaign against Khwarezm, this time against Khwarezm Shah Yusuf Sufi. In 1375, a campaign was launched against Mogolistan, during which he defeated the ruling emir there, Qamar ad-Din. During these years, Timur was on very friendly terms with Khan Toktamish, who fled to Samarkand in 1374 to escape the persecution of the White Horde Khan, Urus. Thanks to Timur and his support, Toktamish managed to deal with his opponents and become the Khan of the White Horde. In 1380, Toktamish also subdued the Golden Horde and gained enormous power. Meanwhile, Timur was expanding his territories in the west. In 1381, he captured Herat and Serax. In the same year, Sabzevar and most of Khorasan voluntarily submitted to him. He faced resistance here only from Gurgan's ruler, Emir Vali. The city of Isfahan, which belonged to him, was taken by storm, after which the Caspian region of Mazandaran submitted to Timur. In 1383, a rebellion was suppressed with extraordinary cruelty. The inhabitants of Sabzevar, about 2,000 captured Sarbadars, were walled up alive. In the same year, Kandahar fell and Sistan was conquered. In 1384, Timur launched a new campaign into the Caspian regions. Emir Vali resisted as best he could, defending every fortress, but in the end he had to abandon his capital and flee to the mountains. Nothing is known about his further fate. Pursuing the retreating Vali, Timur captured Ray at the beginning of 1380. After spending the winter in this city, he took Sultaniye and then returned to Samarkand and immediately began preparations for the next military campaign. The core of Timur's army throughout his campaigns consisted of Turkic-Mongol nomadic warriors, skilled horse archers and cavalry, supplemented by conquered peoples. Over time, he replaced the tribal chiefs with members of his own family and loyal followers. Because his army was almost constantly on campaign, his commanders found it difficult to develop alternative centers of power or to conspire against him. The key to the military success of the Timurids was Timur himself. He was not just a phenomenal tactician. He carefully prepared for each campaign and gathered all possible information about his enemy's weaknesses. He personally led every military campaign, rarely delegating authority, and maintained loyalty among his troops. Thanks to the rich spoils from the province and thanks to fear. So, in 1386, Timur gathered a large army and once again moved westward. In a 3-year campaign, Timur advanced into modern Azerbaijan, then invaded Armenia and Georgia. Tbilisi, Misketa, and Gori were severely devastated. After the capture of Van, Timur's soldiers took all the women and children into slavery and killed the men. In the summer of 1387, the military operations moved to western Iran, which at that time belonged to Timur. Isfahan under Muzaffariz surrendered without a fight. But then, angered by the tax collectors' arbitrariness, the townspeople started an uprising. Timur ordered this major city to be given an exemplary punishment. His official historian Giyas I described the massacre of the peaceful residents like this. From the cloud of swords, so much rain of blood fell that streams of it flooded the streets. The surface of the water gleamed with blood, reflecting a red color like the dawn in the sky. In the city, whole mountains of corpses piled up, and outside the city, they built entire towers out of the heads of the slain, which surpassed the height of large buildings. 70,000 people died in days. In the following month, Timur took Shiraz and all of Fars. The Muzaffaris who ruled here became his vassals. However, events on the eastern borders of his empire distracted Tamerlane from conquering Iran. The Golden Horde Khan Toktamish, with whom relations had significantly cooled by that time, attacked Maverannahr. He defeated Timur's son Umar Sheikh, besieged Bukhara, and burned Chagatai's palace in Kashkadaria. Miran Shah arrived from Khorasan to help his brother and defeated the Golden Horde forces. Upon learning of this, Timur hurriedly returned to Samarkand in 1383 and 1388. For several years, Toktamish became his main opponent. After driving out the enemy, Timur marched on Khwarezm, whose ruler had supported Toktamish. He captured Urgench and executed the Khwarezm Shah. Timur ordered all the inhabitants of the Khwarezmian capital to be relocated to Samarkand and the city itself to be destroyed. In 1389, Timur launched a grand campaign into Mogolistan and defeated their troops. The following year, Tamerlane spent preparing for war with Toktamish. He gathered a large army while also addressing supply issues. The campaign started in February 1391, the coldest part of the year. Toktamish delayed battle, drawing Timur further into the steppe to starve his large army. A detachment sent out to forage fell into an ambush. The Khan also tried to burn the meadows in front of Timur's troops, but the wet spring prevented him from doing so. Seeing his hungry men nearing exhaustion, Timur sent 20,000 horsemen to catch up with Toktamish and force a battle. Their task was to delay him until the main forces arrived. The plan worked, and in June 1391 Toktamish was forced to retreat to the Kundurcha River. Two huge armies lined up in the shape of large crescents. Both armies consisted mainly of light and heavy cavalry archers. Timur also brought infantry from his Central Asian cities, and Toktamish from the urban centers of the Horde. Timur strengthened his flanks by placing detachments behind them to protect against encirclement, and commanded the rear guard behind the center. The Golden Horde struck first, attacking along the entire front. Toktamish personally led multiple attacks. However, some of Toktamish's flank commanders retreated either due to betrayal or misunderstanding. Now, with the Horde's forces stretched thin, Timur ordered a counterattack on the left and in the center. Tamerlane's army launched a counteroffensive and, with a powerful flank attack, routed the Horde. The battle was incredibly fierce and accompanied by unprecedented bloodshed. The Horde was utterly defeated, but Toktamish managed to escape. After devastating his opponent's lands along the Volga, Timur returned to Samarkand in October. In 1392, Iran began a major new campaign after its rulers recovered from earlier defeats. He was opposed by the brave and powerful Emir Mansur. The decisive battle took place on the plain before Shiraz. Mansur and his army bravely began the fight, but soon started to give way to the stronger and more skillful opponent. However, even after the flanks of his army were broken, Mansur continued to fight bravely. Breaking through to Timur's very tent, he tried 3 times to strike him, until he was pulled from his horse and killed. All captured Muzaffarids were executed, and their lands were annexed to Timur's domains. From Iran, Tamerlane's army moved toward Baghdad. which surrendered without a fight. Then Timur went to the Caucasus. In 1394, he devastated Georgia and stopped for the winter near the border with the Golden Horde. By that time, Toktamish had regained his strength and tried to organize an anti-Timur alliance by contacting the Ottomans and the Mamluks. Timur did not allow such a coalition to form and decided that Toktamish had to be destroyed once and for all. Observing Timur's movements, Toktamish positioned his army north of the Caucasus. Both sent envoys to each other in last attempts at diplomatic settlement, but to no avail. Timur made a dash deep into the steppe in the early months of 1395 and caught Toktamish on the banks of the Terek River. The Golden Horde held the north bank of the nearest ford. Not wanting to storm it, Timur marched upstream for 3 days, and Toktamish accompanied him on the opposite bank to prevent him from crossing. However, Tamerlane used a trick. On the third night, he ordered the women and servants from his entourage to put on armor and continue moving along the river. While the main forces quickly retreated in the darkness and crossed the now unguarded ford, Toktamish soon discovered the trick, but it was already too late. Timur's army successfully crossed and settled in their position late in the evening of April 14. Anticipating a night attack, Timur ordered a ditch to be dug around his camp. Small detachments of Toktamish spent the whole night skirmishing at the edges of the ditch, playing instruments and shouting, keeping Timur's army on edge, expecting an assault. Toktamish kept his main army in the camp, letting them rest. On the morning of the 15th, both armies lined up for the decisive battle. Timur increased the size of his rearguard, expecting to be surrounded. Toktamish began the battle. His right flank attacked the opponent's left rearguard. Timur ordered the cavalry on his left flank to help, which forced the attacking horde warriors to retreat. Trying to put pressure on the enemy, Timur's horsemen continued the pursuit, leaving the main army unprotected, and were drawn into a feigned retreat meant to lure them into a trap. The trick worked. They were surrounded and destroyed. The battle formation was lost, and Timur retreated to the fortified camp, pursued closely by Toktamish's troops, who nearly captured him himself. Now that Timur was under threat, his commanders acted quickly, arranging the wagons into an improvised fortification. They held off the horde long enough for the rest of the army to recover and form reinforcements. By evening, they counterattacked and pushed the horde back until nightfall separated them. Thus ended the first day of the battle. Discipline and composure were restored that night. And early in the morning on April 16, both armies lined up. Toktamish's army once again began the battle with its left flank, starting to push Timur's right flank, which nearly broke. One of the commanders orders large shields to be driven into the ground, and from behind this barricade, archers open fire on the approaching enemy, stopping their advance. Timur reinforced them with several detachments, repelling the attack with a volley of arrows. The second day ended much better for Timur than the first. That same evening, he made an offer to a discontented emir in Toktamish's camp, promising him a reward for leaving. The emir agreed and left the battlefield in the morning along with his men. Toktamish was disheartened but determined, and once again formed his left flank, which had been weakened by the absence of the emir's warriors. Toktamish's center and flanks attacked Timur, but he reinforced his right and broke through the horde's weakened left flank. The fierce battle continued until evening. Toktamish valiantly tried to hold the left flank and prevent encirclement, but luck was lost. On Tamerlane's side, the defeated Toktamish planned an orderly retreat, sending one commander to the Caucasus, who led the pursuers away. This gave Toktamish time to escape while Timur chased the remnants of his army. However, Toktamish was unable to gather another army, leaving his cities at Timur's mercy. The detachments he sent devastated Toktamish's territories from the Don to the Dnieper. Timur himself ravaged Crimea and reached the shores of Azov. Then he moved up the Don River to the border of the Ryazan Principality and captured the city of Yelets. But he did not advance further north. Moscow and many other cities escaped Timur's wrath. Toktamish fled, but he was never able to regain his power. The Battle of the Terek had catastrophic consequences for the Golden Horde, leading to its eventual collapse. By crushing Toktamish, Tamerlane weakened the Golden Horde. Weakened and depopulated, it was never able to return to its former power. In July 1396, Timur returned to Samarkand. By that time, he had heard rumors about the weakness of the Delhi Sultanate. Once a powerful state, it was rapidly losing its influence due to internal turmoil and constant struggles for the throne. By the time Timur began preparations for the Indian campaign, the Sultanate was ruled by a weak monarch, Mahmud Shah II, who was actually controlled by the minister Malu Iqbal. It didn't take long to find a pretext for the invasion either. Although Islam was the official religion of the Delhi Sultanate, most of its inhabitants, the Hindus, were not Muslims. Timur simply accused the Sultan of lacking zeal in fighting the enemies of Islam. Although he claimed that he invaded India to punish the idolaters, in reality his intention was nothing more than to plunder the decaying sultanate. One of Timur's grandsons, Pir Muhammad, was entrusted with commanding the army's vanguard. In December 1397, Pir Muhammad invaded India, defeated a small detachment of Malu Iqbal's brother, and besieged Multan. The city put up a stubborn defense, and Pir Muhammad asked his grandfather for help, who was ready to assist. In March 1398, Timur left Samarkand with 92,000 men, mostly Turkic troops, and in September crossed the Indus River, where he divided his army into two parts. Most of them reinforced Pir Muhammad, while Timur himself moved on. And finally, after a 6-month siege, Multan surrendered. Timur marched through India without encountering resistance. The local rulers submitted to him. Soon his army reached the city of Talamba, located northeast of Multan, and plundered it. At the end of October, Pir Muhammad reunited and joined his grandfather, and the combined army moved further towards Delhi. However, a small army of Khokars blocked his way. This was the first attempt at organized resistance against the aggressor, but the forces were unequal, and the Khokhar army was utterly defeated. Timur continued his advance toward the capital of the Delhi Sultanate. After some time, his army reached the outskirts of the Maverannahr fort. The garrison was commanded by the ruler of the Rajputs, Raijual Chand. The fort was considered impregnable and sheltered within its walls both Hindus and Khokhar Muslims who had fled from neighboring villages to escape the invaders. To avoid delaying the army, Timur sent the main forces further toward Delhi. He himself took 10,000 horsemen to punish those who were in Maverannahr for their resistance. With a sudden attack, Timur's warriors took the outer walls of the fort. The defenders had to retreat behind the inner walls and take up defense. The ruler of the Rajputs understood that he didn't have many warriors and that they wouldn't be able to resist for long. Therefore, he decided to acknowledge Timur's authority and went to his camp with a small detachment to discuss the terms. As soon as he arrived at the camp, his men were killed, and Raijual Chand himself was taken prisoner. When they learned about this, the defenders of the fortress continued to resist, the lord of the Rajputs was executed, and the fortress was stormed again. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, wives and children were killed by their husbands and fathers to avoid falling into the hands of the Timurids. The remaining Hindu and Muslim defenders stood side by side against Timur's men. They all perished and the fortress was destroyed. Then Timur continued his march toward Delhi, looting, burning, and slaughtering people along the way, without caring whether the victims were Hindus or Muslims. By late November, he rejoined the army. Timur did not head straight to Delhi. Instead, he crossed the Yamuna River on December 8 and captured the forts along the river's fords to secure his rear and drive more refugees into Delhi, thus straining the city's resources and instilling fear in the population. Meanwhile, the Sultan of Delhi and his minister Malu Iqbal were quickly gathering troops for the decisive battle. In mid-December, Timur's army managed to Kuntar 12.
Timur.
Burst out laughing. Cricket chirping. Timur left and went back to Delhi. The skirmish inspired the Sultan, boosting his confidence and prompting him to fight outside the city walls. In turn, Timur, upon returning to the camp, ordered all the prisoners taken during the campaign to be killed so that he could use all the forces he had. The battle took place on December 17, 1398. The balance of forces before the battle was as follows. Tamerlane's army consisted of about 90,000 horsemen, some of whom could dismount and fight on foot if necessary. The Sultan of Delhi was able to gather only 10,000 cavalrymen, 40,000 infantrymen, and 125 elephants. Of course, I don't understand what the people of Delhi were counting on in this situation. Most likely they relied on the combat power of their elephants. Timur's right wing was led by his grandson Pir Muhammad, while Timur himself commanded the center. In the Delhi army, Sultan Mahmud and Malu Iqbal were also in the center. Ahead was a line of armored elephants with poison tusk spikes. Towers on their backs held crossbow-wielding warriors. Next to the elephants marched throwers of pots filled with fire mixture and rockets with iron tips. And in front of the elephants, an advance guard of 600 men provided cover for them. All of this was new to the Timurids, but above all, they feared the elephants the most. Preparing to face these huge animals, Timur ordered a large number of iron caltrops to be made and scattered them in front of the formation to injure their feet. And so the battle began to the sound of war drums. At the very beginning of the battle, Timur ordered his left and right flanks to attack the enemy infantry. His horsemen used traditional steppe tactics. They fired at the enemy infantry from a distance and retreated, trying to lure their units into a feigned retreat. But since the Delhi Sultan's cavalry was outnumbered, it did not. Could not destroy them. After destroying the vanguard of the Delhi Sultanate, Timur ordered his entire army to launch a joint attack. Weakened by prolonged bombardment, the left and right flanks of the Delhi Sultanate's army could not withstand Timur's cavalry's frontal assaults. Soon they faltered and began to retreat, planning to take shelter behind the city walls. In turn, Sultan Mahmud and Malu Iqbal held the center and managed to attack Timur's vanguard. Nevertheless, they were stopped as the Timurids used caltrops to injure the elephants. Soon, the left and right flanks of Tamerlane returned to the battlefield, having pursued the enemy and completely defeated the left and right flanks of the Delhi Sultan. Tamerlane's cavalry struck the rear of the enemy army. The Delhi army's center fought while surrounded since evening. They broke through and took shelter behind the city walls. Timur pursued them to the gates, but, wary of a trap in the narrow streets at night, he retreated. At night, Sultans Mahmud and Malu Iqbal left the city, barely escaping from the Timurid horsemen. The next day, Timur accepted the surrender of the remaining nobles of Delhi. He declared an amnesty for the city and ordered the khutbah to be read in his name, sending news of his victory along with the captured elephants throughout the empire. Initially, only a small group of soldiers was allowed into the city to guard the Timurid leaders who wanted to inspect the city and collect ransom. However, quarrels broke out between the soldiers and the townspeople, and looting began. It started small but became widespread the next day. Thousands of soldiers rushed into Delhi to take whatever they could, and over the next few days, the city was looted. Prisoners, precious stones, and fabrics were taken out of Delhi. Gias 1 reports that a huge amount of loot was captured during those days. So even the lowest-ranking soldiers had about 20 prisoners each, and many had more than 100. Although Timur insisted that he had not given the order to plunder, when news reached him that Lydia was resisting, he ordered his commanders to kill them. For the next week, the entire city was left at the mercy of Timur's army, which killed and burned everyone who remained inside. According to Gias 1, the towers made from the heads of the Hindus reached great heights, and their bodies became food for wild animals and birds. By the time Timur left on December 31, 1398, only smoldering ruins remained of Delhi. The poor souls who survived the assault were stricken by hunger and disease. and it took 15 years before a stable government appeared in Delhi again. While Timur was in India, major changes occurred in his empire's west. In 1398, following the death of Qadi Burhaneddin Ahmed, Sivas came under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Sultan Bayezid was constantly expanding his influence in eastern Anatolia, first putting pressure on the Karamanids, then taking Malatya from the Mamluks and forcing the emir of Erzincan, Mutahartan, to flee to Timur. As a result, the Ottoman Empire found itself bordering the Timurids. In June 1399, the Mamluk Sultan Barq died. His heir, the young son Faraj, succeeded this formidable enemy, which weakened the Mamluk state. Here, I'll digress to say that the first contact between Timur and Bayezid actually happened back in early March 1395. While preparing to campaign against Toktamish, Tamerlane wrote Bayezid a letter. Timur used this letter to urge Bayezid to join his campaign against the Golden Horde. In addition, Tamerlane asked not to give refuge to his two enemies, Ahmed Jaler and Kara Yusuf, but for some reason Bayezid refused, and Timur could not forgive him the insult. After leaving India, Timur briefly returned to Samarkand, and in April 1399 the not-so-young emir set out on his 7-year campaign. On the way, he removed his son Miran Shah from governing Sultania for unstable behavior. And then, in the last month of 1399, he devastated Georgia and spent the winter there. In the spring of 1400, he continued his campaign in Georgia, once again plundering Tbilisi. In the spring of 1400, he and his men and horses were on the pastures of modern Azerbaijan. In the fall of 1400, he moved west into Anatolia. After capturing Erzincan for Mutahartan, he headed toward his main goal, Sivas, where Bayezid's son Suleiman was located. Suleiman left Sivas before Timur arrived, and the city fell on September 7 after an 18-day siege. About the horrors that the residents of the conquered city had to endure, Foma Mitsopsky wrote the following: "Immediately, a cruel order was given to the army to take the poor captive, to torture those who had wealth and seize the treasures they had hidden, and to tie women to the tails of horses and set the horses galloping." One must see here the terrible misfortune that befell innocent young men, both believers and non-believers. Timur ordered a pit to be dug, to tie up 4,000 people by their hands, and to bury them alive. Bayezid, then leading the blockade of Constantinople, lacked time to respond. Before Timur left the territory of the Ottoman Empire, by September 15, Timur attacked Malatya, and soon after that marched through Syria. Panicked, the Mamluk rulers of northern Syria urgently asked Cairo for help, but political strife blocked their aid. On October 28, Timur brought his troops to Aleppo. The city's governor surrendered on November 2, supplying Timur with provisions and receiving permission to keep his rule. However, this did not stop Tamerlane from sacking the city and building towers of skulls as punishment for previous offenses. Then Timur sent an embassy to Cairo, demanding tribute and the submission of the Sultan. The enraged Sultan Faraj set out in November, accompanied by the famous scholar Ibn Khaldun, and reached Damascus on December 23, shortly before Timur's troops approached the outskirts of the city. Clashes between the two armies continued throughout December, and in the first days of January 1401, a larger but inconclusive battle took place. On January 6, news of an uprising in Cairo forced young Faraj to secretly leave Damascus at night, disappointing its inhabitants. In the absence of Sultan Faraj, Damascus capitulated, although its citadel held out. Throughout January and February of 1401, Timur constantly demanded payment from Damascus, forcing them to remove all valuables from the city. On March 16, Timur allowed his men to loot the city. By the 17th, the city was set on fire. Craftsmen and artisans were taken captive and sent to decorate Timur's capital, Samarkand. On the 19th, Timur left the charred ruins of Damascus, and soon after, a plague of locusts descended on the region, destroying crops and bringing new chaos. After leaving Syria, Timur headed northeast, suggesting he was returning to Samarkand. It was so convincing that Sultan Ahmad Jalayir, who was being sheltered by Bayezid, considered himself safe enough to return to Baghdad. But Timur suddenly turned south, took Mosul, and sent 20,000 men to Baghdad. Ahmad fled back to Bayezid again, leaving his commander to defend the city. By early June, Baghdad was under siege. The rebellious city resisted the besiegers for 40 days but was finally taken. Timur ordered each of his warriors to bring 2 heads of local residents to build 100 of his favorite towers made of skulls. Since it was difficult to collect the required number of heads, the soldiers had to kill prisoners brought from Syria, as well as women and children. In those days, up to 90,000 people were exterminated, and 120 tall towers were built from their heads. Timur left Baghdad, driven away by the stench coming from the numerous corpses. He spent the winter of 1401 in present-day Azerbaijan, monitoring Bayezid's activities. In addition to giving refuge to Sultan Ahmed, Bayezid also recaptured Sivas and Erzincan. In the latter, he took Mutahartin's wives and children as hostages. Timur sent letters to Bayezid urging him to expel Sultan Ahmed and Kara Yusuf in order not to incur Timur's wrath. Bayezid's response was unequivocal. Fighting is our habit, entering battle is our goal, and fighting for the faith is our duty. Among other provocative letters, in which Timur compared Bayezid to an ant, or Bayezil, he wrote his own name in large golden letters and Timur's name in small black ones. And there were mutual threats. It was clear that war was inevitable. At the end of April 1402, Timur left Azerbaijan and, on his way to Anatolia, attacked Georgia. Kamach and Erzincan quickly fell before Timur before he reached Sivas. When Timur entered the territory of the Ottoman Empire, Bayezid broke off the siege of Constantinople and left it to gather his forces in Bursa. There he recruited a large number of Tatars from central Anatolia who inhabited that region. From the time of the Ilkhanate, Bayezid set out on a swift campaign, stopping briefly in Ankara. There he was strongly advised to set up camp and prepare for Timur's arrival in this protected place on a well-irrigated and fortified hill overlooking the Great Plain. But not wanting to allow Timur to raid his eastern provinces, Bayezid left a small garrison and moved east to meet him at Sivas, hoping to neutralize Timur's superiority in cavalry. In the mountains at Tokat, northeast of Sivas, Bayezid encountered Timur's vanguard but received shocking news. While Bayezid was moving east, Timur made a forced march to the southwest, captured Kayseri and approached Ankara. The Ottoman Sultan was forced to rush back at full speed. His men were exhausted from the summer heat. He lost thousands of men in this campaign. Timur had to decide whether to fight near Ankara or to march against Bayezid. Given the terrain, he chose the first option. Part of his army laid siege to Ankara, and several more detachments were sent for supplies. Not missing the opportunity to increase his chances, Timur ordered the remaining troops to build a dam across the Chubuk stream and divert its water into a new channel, planning to deprive the enemy of their water supply. It was a complex engineering task, but Timur's disciplined soldiers, assisted by elephants, managed to complete it in a few days. Now Timur's troops had their own water, which was essential for fighting in July, while the Ottomans had none. However, Timur underestimated his opponent. Bayezid moved much faster than Timur expected, and arrived in the vicinity of Ankara a day earlier than anticipated. Some Ottoman commanders advised Bayezid to attack immediately, since the Timurid forces were not concentrated. But his troops were too exhausted from the forced march, so the Sultan chose to wait until the next day. This only worsened the water supply situation and allowed Timur to recall the detachments he had sent out for foraging. Sources differ regarding the date, but most suggest that Bayezid arrived late on July 27, and in the morning of the 28th, the armies lined up on the plain near the village of Melikshah. The Battle of Ankara was about to begin. Sources differ greatly on the number of battle participants. A German chronicler captured after the battle estimated the total number of both armies at over 1 million people. Meanwhile, one of the modern authors believes that neither of the armies numbered more than 20,000 people. It seems that Timur had a larger army, and we can assume that it was comparable in size to the one with which he invaded India, about 90,000. Subtitles created by Dima. The majority of Timur's army consisted of formidable Turkic horse archers, supported by various subject peoples, such as Turkmen cavalry, Persian infantry, and Armenians gathered along the way. Timur's army had a center, 2 flanks, a reserve, and advance guards ahead of each section, with Timur leading the center. The left wing was commanded by his younger son Shahrukh, the right by his eldest surviving son Miran Shah, and the reserve was led by his grandson and heir Muhammad Sultan. At the front of the entire army marched a line of 32 war elephants from India, dressed in bright trappings, with archers and naphtha throwers and swords attached to their tusks. They formed a living barrier to intimidate the enemy. Bayezid's forces were smaller, possibly 60,000 men, mostly infantry. Bayezid commanded from the center, under the protection of his personal guard of archers, his 3 sons, and the corps of the Janissaries. His son Suleiman commanded the left wing, which consisted of Rumelian troops and a large number of Tatars. Another son, Mehmet, commanded the rear guard, and the right wing was led by his vassal Ishurin. Stefan Lazarevich of Serbia commanded the Anatolian infantry and a 5,000-strong Serbian heavy cavalry. At 10 a.m., Timur dismounted and prayed for victory. Sources differ on who attacked first, but we know that at the beginning, the battle unfolded between the Ottoman left flank and Timur's right flank. The fighting was fierce. The Rumelians were heavily pressed, but they managed to hold their positions. Despite the enemy elephants, as well as their own fatigue and thirst, Timur ordered his left wing to attack the Serbs on the right. However, Stefan Lazarevich's Lazarevich knights wore the heaviest armor on the battlefield. Therefore, they not only put up fierce resistance, but were also able to turn the tide. The Serbs began to gain the upper hand, and Timur's troops started to retreat before them, while Stefan chased them all the way to the Timurid lines. Some sources claim that the Serbs overdid it, while others say that Bayezid ordered them to stop so they wouldn't get surrounded. In any case, soon half of the Timurid reserve supported their left flank, and Stefan was pushed back into the left, which exposed the right part of Bayezid's center. However, as usual, Timur had more tricks up his sleeve. Long before the battle, Timur had been in contact with Bayezid's Tatars and convinced them that he was their true leader. The Tatar troops on the left flank suddenly switched sides, joining Timur and attacking the rear of the already wavering Rumi forces. There is no doubt that this change of sides was planned by Timur from the very beginning. Mehmed, Bayezid's son and reserve commander, attacked the Tatars from behind, and although this somewhat eased the pressure on the Ottoman left flank, the numbers were on the side of the Timurids, and the Rumelians continued to give ground. Bayezid's heir, Suleiman, struck back at the Tatars, broke through them, and began to retreat. Stefan Lazarevich, having just learned that the Natalians had betrayed his cause, routed the battered Timurid left corps, cut his way to the Sultan, and urged him to flee while there is still time. Ignoring his advice, Bayezid retreated to a hill located behind the Ottoman lines, and there, with his Janissaries and several Serbs from the right wing, prepared to take up a position that would at least cover his heir's retreat. Most of the Serbs also retreated, either by Bayezid's order or by Stefan's order. Rejecting as dishonorable the suggestion that he should try to hide, the Sultan fought shoulder to shoulder with his men, with an axe in his hands. Time and again Timur's men attacked, and time and again the Ottomans pushed them back. The valiant but hopeless defense continued for several hours until darkness fell. And when Suleiman was safe, Bayezid finally decided to flee. With 300 or so horsemen, he tried to break through to the east. Timur's men, fearing that the greatest prize might slip away from them, began the pursuit, and the Sultan was captured when his horse stumbled and threw him off. With the capture of Bayezid, the catastrophe of the Ottoman Empire was complete. At sunset on July 29, Bayezid was brought in chains to Timur, and the garrison of Ankara soon capitulated. Timur ordered his chains removed. Nevertheless, Bayezid was a prisoner and spent the rest of his life in Timur's domains. The Ottomans lost more than 30,000 men in this battle, compared to Timur's 15,000 casualties. After that, the Ottoman Empire plunged into a decade-long civil war between Bayezid's sons. Timur now ruled freely in western Anatolia. The rest of 1402 was spent pillaging throughout the region. The former capital of the Ottoman Empire, Bursa, was captured, and the family of Mutakartan was freed. Many Ottoman troops fled from Timur's grasp on Genoese and Venetian galleys, whose crews were happy to accept payment for ferrying them across the strait. One Timurid source reports that in the autumn of 1402 envoys from Constantinople arrived to Timur with tribute and gifts, which allowed the city to avoid an attack. In December, Timur captured the hospitaller fortress of Smyrna, which had refused the demand to convert to Islam. After spending a few more months in Anatolia, Timur began to withdraw in the spring of 1403. In March, Bayezid died, possibly as a result of suicide, and soon after, Timur's grandson and heir, Muhammad Sultan, who resembled his grandfather in mind and deeds, also passed away. His death was a blow to Timur. The news of the great victory over the powerful Bayezid brought him gifts from the ruler of Trebizond, the Mamluks, and the Georgian king Georgi VII. Timur was looking for a target on which he could vent his grief, and rejecting Georgi's gifts, he attacked Georgia at the end of 1403 Saur. Only gifts in the form of huge herds, horses, and coins minted with Timur's name finally calmed the old conqueror, who again spent the winter in A. By the summer of 1404, Timur returned to Samarkand and was soon preparing for his greatest campaign, the invasion of Ming Dynasty China. The advance unit set out on the campaign as early as November, and Timur himself moved at the head of the main forces at the beginning of 1405. However, this time his plans were not meant to come true. After reaching Atrar, he suddenly fell ill. It is reported that the illness may have been caused by excessive wine consumption during one of the feasts. Soon a fever started. There were skilled doctors in his entourage who did everything they could and gave him the best medicines. However, again, the pain grew stronger with each passing day. Finally, Timur realized that he was dying. He said goodbye to his wives, dictated his will, and declared his grandson Pir Muhammad as his heir. He remained clear-minded and resolute until the very end. And on February 18, he passed away at the age of 70. His body, carefully embalmed and dressed in a shroud, was placed in a black wooden coffin and transported to Samarkand. However, his descendants were unable to preserve Tamerlane's empire. But that's a completely different story. This concludes my story about the Great Conqueror. I hope you found it interesting, and we'll see each other in the next video. See you soon. Goodbye.